Welcome to Five from the Archive. This time it's Caroline Preece, who's a great supporter of Camversation and whose work I really admire as a street photographer and minimalist photographer as well. Lots to see here and a great recommendation at the end. So thank you very much for coming along to this, Caroline. Now, we've started each of these with a bit of a chat with people where I've sort of said a bit of an open question. And I've just sort of said, talk to us really about your photography background, because I know I followed you for a long time. I consider you a great friend. I really enjoy your photography, but I'd love to know more about your journey in photography, kind of what got you to this point, because all I see really is the kind of end superb images.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in your journey, Caroline, if you're able to share that with us a bit as well.
I came to photography quite late in life. I basically describe it as a rebound relationship. Basically, I was engaged to the guy, supposed to be emigrating to Australia with him, split up with him, and then you need to find something to do. So I took up photography. It's probably the most successful rebound relationship going because I'm still doing it. But I mean, I've always had photography as part of my life because my mother's a photographer and she's been an active member of Chichester Camera Club for many, many years. So I always grew up with her taking photographs, and also she had the likes of sort of Michael Kenner, Ansel Adams, and all the books around. So it'd always been part of my life. It just took a while to actually do it myself. And it's kind of very much gone from going on holiday with her and me getting really fed up waiting while she takes photographs to both of us now taking photographs and making sure we're not the last person in the tour back to the bus. So if you
I
can't
can
beat
see.
them, join them.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel that in that journey as well, your own photography as well as your interests have developed? You've begun focusing more on certain aspects or certain genres, or are you still open to lots of different genres?
Massively. So I think one of the things in photography as you do it is evolving. So I very much believe that what you photograph is a product of who you are, how you think. I always think it'd be really interesting to do a little study and look at what did you do for a job and what sort of photography are you interested in. I mean, the amount of people in sort of scientists, engineers who do the much more detailed stuff. So, I mean, as I'm sure everyone here listening will kind of agree with, you start off doing a bit of everything, experimenting, playing. But then you tend to fall into things. What works with the way your brain works? What do you enjoy? What works with the way you think? So I've kind of very much fallen into street photography. I live in London, which most of the time, which is the perfect location for it. It doesn't involve any planning. I sort of go out in the morning with my camera. I explore the world with a camera, kind of get immersed in things. I mean, even without the camera, I do people watching. So this is just people watching and then actually taking photographs of them. But I mean, I still do. I mean, I still do other bits. So I do quite a bit of photography also down the coast and the beach, street photography. But I love the seaside. I love the vibe of the seaside. And with that, I also kind of do a little bit of minimalism as well. So I've recently got a series of images from a really wet day down in Worthing. And it's just very simple, a ton of negative space. And one of them's just got three crows in, one taking off. And I had them in the recent exhibition at Chichester Camera Club Advanced Workers. And lots of positive feedback, but also they found it hilarious in terms of I look like I'm a real cheapskate in terms of ink usage as well. There's a lot of white negative space there.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a very long way of answering your question, but so primarily, so you evolve as you go along,
Mm.
primarily street, but actually ultimately it's exploring the world with your camera. What captures your attention, what amazes you, what interests you. Photography is fundamentally how you see the world. So if you give me hoarfrost, I wake up, there's hoarfrost or there's snow, I'm going to be going out doing your landscapes, your trees, capturing that aspect of it because it's beautiful, it's amazing, and it inspires me. But I'm not going to be the person who goes and plans for a long time in advance about going to this particular scene, this
Mm.
particular place with the weather and sun in that particular
Mhm.
direction. It's not me.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And I think that kind of level of spontaneity that we were talking about just before we started recording, actually,
Yeah.
that level of spontaneity is really demonstrated in your images as
Mm.
well, because I think they capture so many elements of the unexpected and so many elements of the unusual that if you almost had spent a huge amount of time planning, you probably wouldn't be able to have that level of flexibility in your pictures because you've got something in your mind.
I very much describe street photography I mean, first of all, going back to what you said, yeah, absolutely. It's in terms of there's a lot of luck in it. It's seeing what the world is, being inspired by the world around you, but also beyond street photography to whatever else captures your attention or captures your fancy. It's been inspired and interested and fascinated in the world around you. But in terms of street photography, I very much sort of describe it as you set yourself up for success, but then you require the gods, street photography gods, to be smiling on to you, because you can put yourself in the best place with the best situation, the best location, the best light. But unless the people within the scene then deliver something as well, it's a wasted effort. It's just that little bit of unpredictableness, luck. I mean, I sometimes look at some of my images and I'm like, okay, that actually looks quite set up, but it really isn't.
But you're in the right place, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's being there.
It's the element of luck. It's just waiting. Say you set yourself up for success and just hope somebody's smiling on you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Now, but just before we look at your images, I'm just going to mention one last thing, because I'm sure lots of people who are listening may have already seen your photography, but if not, you mix that minimalism really, really well with your street photography. So without wanting to give too much away, because you may talk about this, I don't know, but just purely out of interest, do you see the scene first? Do you look at the scene and say, that's a great scene, I'm waiting for someone to come into it? Or do you see the people or the people in the environment first? What's your kind of approach, your mindset to that?
I don't really have any set structure. I'll wander somewhere, I'll see some potential in something, and then I will try and capture that potential. I mean, mostly I don't tend to find an interesting background and photograph something against it. It's not to say I don't do it all the time. Sometimes I might find an interesting person. Obviously, the environment has got to be able to show them off to best effect. So no matter how interesting the person is, if your background is incredibly messy, if the light's in all the wrong places, it's going to be very, very hard to translate that into an image. So you need the world and sort of the background and the environment to work for you. But very rarely do I sort of pre-visualize to any level of degree. So I haven't included here, but I mean, I did a whole bit of photography around when England won the Euro, so lost the Euros. Okay, I was doing photography around the football, they lost it, but it was a really interesting dynamic coming out. So I was just sort of wandering around with the camera, and my most interesting image from that was actually I'm on the London Underground and I'm just capturing people coming up the escalators. I mean, this is late at night, they're drunk, they're fed up, they're depressed, and it's capturing those moments. So it's less sort of planned and set up as in terms of the environment. I was like, actually, what I want to do is capture sort of the feeling and emotion of the actual day.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. This is why I enjoy your photography so much. Caroline, can we see your 5 from the archive then, the 5 pictures that are, I suppose, important to you in some way? Thanks very much, Caroline. Now we're seeing your first picture. I think I can see why you took this one, but I'll pass over to you to tell us why it's important. Thank you.
I think so. This one, I think for me, it really emphasizes the importance. We're always trying to bring a camera around with you. It doesn't need to be a big camera. It doesn't need to be a fancy camera, but it's having that camera there. So I've got a tiny RX100, which I'll often throw into my bag. And I took this coming back from a camera club meeting on the train. So in London, get the tube to camera club. We go to the pub afterwards. Tube allows you to drink. And the tubes are really empty. It's late at night. It's coming from deepest, darkest sort of Loughton. It's very, very atmospheric. And I was just looking at, these are 2 sort of people on the next door carriage. And I just really liked the atmosphere and the idea and the loneliness of them. And it was just literally sort of shooting through the window. And so this is where I was talking earlier on about how do I approach things. It wasn't necessarily thinking about this as a scene I want to capture. It was just like, actually, this is interesting. There's people there on their own. They're on the train. There's a lone woman. It could have potential in terms of the storytelling aspect. But also where the luck comes into it as well, because you require the people in the image to actually look interesting as well. I always say in street photography, compelling expression, compelling gesture. You could have the best atmosphere of the scene, but if the people themselves their expression doesn't work or their gesture doesn't work, it won't tell the story. Here, she's got that slightly anxious, wary look on her face and that lone person at the far distance. So you've got a sense of isolation coming through. And I think there's a photographer who talks about capturing the in-between moments. Often we go to places and take photographs at the location. I think it's really good to be able to take photographs on the journey as you go between places as well. Often that's where interesting scenes happen, interesting moments happen.
Thank you. Thank you. And with this, obviously you process this in black and white. I won't
Yeah.
necessarily discuss processing too much, but this just absolutely emphasizes the graphic nature and that loneliness, and also goes back to your minimalist approach, doesn't it? There's not too much going on here. Absolutely
Yeah.
outstanding. Thank you. Dare I ask what time this was, by the way? You said you went to the pub afterwards, but you didn't say what time it might be.
About 11:30.
That's not too bad then. We won't judge you for that.
Yeah, we got chucked out of the pub at that time. We've got this really great relationship with the local pub where they actually stay open a little bit longer on Wednesday Camera Club nights.
That's the kind of pub we all like. Thank you. Thank you very much, Caroline. Really interesting shot.
This is the next one I've got. So this is one of the few occasions I've seen a scene and I've waited for the actors to come into it. There was just as it's in a tunnel, this amazing shaft of light coming through. And I thought I really want to do something with that shaft of light. So I was just photographing people coming through the tunnel, coming through that shaft of light. And there's a lot of people passing through, but they just weren't necessarily that interesting. And this is why I say it's so much where the luck comes in as well. It's not just having the scene, but having the right person in the scene with the right expression, the right gesture, something which will add to the story. And I was just about to give up and thinking, okay, great potential, but I've been here for ages. I've now run out of patience. I'm going to move on. When this boy came along with his parents, and he literally just stopped and pointed towards the light. And this is just that where I talk about the God smiling on you. It's that sort of moment. Couldn't have planned it, couldn't have predicted it, but absolutely sort of obviously made the image. But I mean, for me, photography also works on several levels. So I've got the photograph I'm telling, but also my brain goes and tells stories as well. And I very much, and so there's what's in the image, but I've called this out of the darkness. But to me, it also symbolizes hope. So you've got that small child pointing to the light. Light symbolizes hope. So whatever's going on around, whatever's happening in your world, there's still that shaft of light to look to. So it's probably very overly sentimental.
No, I can see why. I really can. And I think your comment about the actors coming into the scene, if this had been an adult, perhaps it wouldn't have the same emotional impact, would it? But because it's a child.
And it's the fact the child pointed as well. I mean, that was the magical ingredient, which I say you can't predict, you can't control, but just got so lucky.
Yeah. Well, look, but equally, can I ask you how long you spotted this environment? How long did you wait for the right person to come in? Because I think I agree with the element of luck, but I also think there's a little bit of effort and planning here as well.
I don't know. I didn't time it. It's probably about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Or something. I'm not sure. I didn't really time it. It was just like, okay, I'm now bored. I've been here for a while. Let's do something different. Maybe not.
Well worth it. Outstanding shot again. Thank you.
So this next shot I've called The Game. And this is where I sometimes think I look at my own images and think they look a little bit set up. Once again, gods of street photography smiling on me. So this was before I met up with our camera club. We were due to have a camera club outing in Canary Wharf. And I was just killing some time before I met up with everybody. So I was just wandering around Canary Wharf. And there's a big square by the Crossrail Plaza. And I was on the far side of it. And as I looked across the square, in one of the sort of the shop front, office front windows there was this table tennis table and people playing tennis. And I thought, that could be interesting. So I did a rapid beeline across the square, had my settings set up from the window before this, and then went past and did what I call a drive-by, which is basically I go past and just take a couple of shots and move on. So I don't really disturb the scene per se. And it just happened to catch this fabulous moment where the guys obviously lost the ball. And I just think in terms of the storytelling element, I mean, I love his body language. There's so much defeat there. But the lady as well, she's got a power stance. And the guy behind her looks a little bit like a heavy to enforce her power stance. And so it was just one of these really, really lucky moments coming through. But I also think that ultimately we're a product of all the images, all the influences we have in our life. I'm a huge fan of Gregory Crewdson, who's not a street photographer, but he has a whole production film set. But he creates these really interesting images of dystopia and suburbia. And within one of those images, there's a lady there with a similar body language to him. So obviously, I didn't see that when I took the shot. But I think when I actually looked at it back on my computer, I think there's something that also connected to me as well in terms of actually that storytelling aspect of it, because I kind of recognized something which I'd seen before.
Thank you. And for me, and I'm sure this sung out to you as well, but the way that this image is almost divided by those horizontal and vertical lines is such a powerful aspect of this shot as well, isn't it?
Mm. But something I had no, it took me a while to actually get to like those, because I'm just like simplicity. But it just creates that, as you said, adds that extra element of interest.
Yeah, it really does. Thank you. Thank you. We'll at the end, we'll ask you for the location of this and we'll take 100 people down there. Thanks, Caroline.
So this is the next one. So this is, I call it Friends Catching Up in a Cafe. Actually, this was another Camera Club outing. So this was with my Sussex Camera Club to Arundel. And it just shows that you often overlook the small towns close to you. But there's actually potential in them, because I've been thinking like Arundel, what's there going to be for me in Arundel? And I went down and there's actually so many interesting cafes, so many interesting places. So this was a cafe down a little side street. And there's a really interesting decor in there. I love the tones. There's only one way to take a photograph, and that the rest of the windows had bushes on. The only way to take a photograph was through the door. So you only had a really, really narrow viewpoint. And I'd taken photographs a number of times in that cafe. We'd also actually stopped for coffee at one point at that cafe. Always combine coffee and cake with street photography. That's my biggest recommendation going. So stopped for coffee and cake in there as well. But this one moment, as I sort of went back several times, I just had this group of friends sitting there within the scene. And I just love it. So like a really intimate moment. You get, for me, when I look at it, so everyone looks at things, they'll take different things away. But for me, it's got a sense of friendship, closeness, conversation. It's just, I think for me, I really like the moment it captured between the three of them.
Thank you. And again, the processing here helps to tell that warm feeling, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a stark effect, not an effect, but it's not a stark style you've applied to this. It's a soft, warm feeling. Do you think that also represents how you felt when you were walking past and engaged with that, in the sense of that's kind of where you were, you thought that's a beautiful scene, I'll reflect it in my image afterwards?
I just think when I look at an image, I don't think I'm necessarily that calculated. I more feel it than think about it, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely.
But obviously, I say full thanks to the person who decorated this cafe. Most of this is like, it was wonderful greens and the old-fashioned staircase, etc. It was amazing potential to work with. But then it's looking at, how can I bring out that moment? How can I bring out the intimacy between them? How can I actually bring out that story? So it's all about, when I look at it, I'm just thinking about what's the story and how do I bring it out to best effect?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
So this is actually one of my favorite images. And I should say, before I go into this one, only child overactive imagination. So I might be taking a whole load of stuff going on from this that no one else does. But for me, it's got several elements. The guy himself, he reminds me of the archetypal sad clown. He's not a clown, but it's got something about that look. He was a performer outside Hamleys. He was obviously paid by Hamleys to perform. But also you've got all the stuff going on inside, which to me just gives this sort of hint of Narnia coming out from inside the shop. So you've got that fantasy make-believe world behind him. And once again, it's getting lucky. I'd seen him outside Hamleys. He'd been dancing around, performing, being all really cheerful. But then he took his break and he sat down and the public mask dropped. And that made a far more interesting image than all the moments where he was dancing around and performing for the public.
And I think this is also the power of street photography, to capture those moments that we don't ordinarily expect to see as well.
Yeah, very much. And always it comes down to, as I said earlier on, for me, what do I connect with? Compelling expression, compelling gesture. He is all about that expression, the body language on the face. As I said, the archetypal sad clown.
Thanks very much for your 5 from the archive, Caroline. And this is someone who you would like to share with other people, perhaps, as well. So let me pass over to you to share this person.
Absolutely. First of all, before I go into it, I say, in some ways, this was massively different. They're so difficult. There's so many incredible, inspiring people, current, modern, and old, to choose from. So I've actually chosen a contemporary photographer. I quite like the fact he is contemporary. I mean, he's quite big on Instagram, but because he's contemporary, there may be a lot of people who haven't actually come across him before. There's a guy called Joachim Moller. He was born in 1999, bless him, way too young. It makes me feel really old. He's only been photographing since 2017. He's super talented, but he's so creative. I mean, he's got such strong storytelling ability in his images, but he's also super, super creative about the way he does it. He plays, he experiments, he pushes the boundaries. He'll sometimes take a huge, massive scene and crop in really tightly to one small detail. He embraces the grain and imperfection with that. But he also does things like diptychs and triptychs where he connects things. I mean, he's the only person I know who can actually put an entire film into 3 images. And sometimes also, mind you, it's just the really interesting juxtapositions he sees as well. So I've got a number of images going through. So this is the first image. So I'm starting off with some of his triptychs and diptychs, because this is combining the different elements together. Each one says something different. To me, it's kind of, you've got this sense of childhood, this movement, this energy. It's like a story, but just in 3 images. Similarly to that one, where the first one was much lighter and fun, there's a real darkness about this. You've got, once again, a really strong story, but by the fact there is only 3 images, it also leaves a huge amount of gaps for the viewer to put their own interpretation in and go on their own journey through it. That old lady at the bottom, the man walking, and then the industrial scene beyond. And this, I say, it's just, once again, a juxtaposition between 2 elements. It's a really interesting juxtaposition. It's very, very clever. But almost it feels like life's crossroads as well. You've got a choice of 2 journeys to go on. And I say it shows you something in a slightly different way and challenges you, makes you think. And this is just plain clever. It's brilliant. Once again, a brilliant ability to juxtapose elements within an image, within a frame. Another one as well. But then we go to his sort of single images, and even in single images, he has this great cinematographic feel and the wonderful ability to tell stories. Here, I mean, it's quite dark and threatening. You can imagine that on some sort of horror film or something. Once again, it's a very cinematographic quality, that really interesting choice of crop he's got, but also that hint of the figure beyond, which has got a sense of threat coming through. But that, I mean, that the tightness of the crop of the boy in the foreground absolutely makes the image. A natural juxtaposition of elements within the frame itself. It gives a hint of an old Western, but the guy on the horse is like, because of the soft focus, you've got the impression of the person. If you could see it in more detail, it becomes more real. Here, once again, he's left the gap to actually, for you to put your imagination into who and what, but also you've got a real sense of movement coming through as well. And just as a final one, this kind of comes from the work he does where he'll find a bigger scene and just crop into a massive detail, really closely into a really interesting detail with it. So visually incredibly interesting. So those are my ones from a photographer to recommend. Joachim Moller, Instagram account, and he's got his own website now.
Fantastic. What a great recommendation, Caroline. I shall be going and adding this person straight after this as well, ahead of anybody else watching this. So again, I can see the similarities between their work and your work and that interest as well. Absolutely. Caroline, thank you so much for coming along today. I really, really appreciate you sharing your five from the archive and also your recommended photographer as well. Absolutely outstanding. I'll put on the links at the end for everybody who'd like to go and see your work and all of your other offerings as well. And just to remind everybody that you are coming back to Camversation quite soon to do a series.
Yeah.
So we'll let people know about that when it comes.
Brilliant. And thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you everybody for actually listening to me as well.
Super duper. We love it. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.